Good morning, everyone, or hyvää huomenta. I'm Rebekah Rousi. I'm a postdoctoral researcher of cognitive science at the Faculty of Information Technology, the same place as Andre. And I'm also part-time at Go4, a digital transformation company. The title of my presentation this morning is Digital Trust in a Smart Society, Technotrust from a cognitive scientific perspective. And as I'm a cognitive scientist, I like putting more words together. So I've added case ethics. Thank you so much, Andre. There was so much food for thought, and there were a lot of overlaps and I guess links that actually draw towards this presentation as well. But here I focus mostly on the human side, so this trust. And what would you trust? What do you trust when you go in online? When you think of, the word digital as a concept. My professor and I, Pertti Saariluoma, have been thinking of this concept, Technotrust, for the last few years. How do we actually describe what trust is in relation to the human? And what is technology? What is this techno? And what comes to mind? And of course, what comes to mind when we think of digital? Which one of these designs would you actually trust when you're entering the internet? Over the years, I've been looking at user experience. User experience in particular has been my focus point. Time and time again, the experience is dramatically affected by whether or not someone perceives a technology as trustworthy. Trust, of course, and the propensity for someone to trust something overlies the emotional state of the individual when they're coming into contact with the design. So I was looking at, for example, Technotrust or digital trust in relation to elevator travel and elevator user experience. And here is a completely embodied trust. I mean, you're putting your physical safety in the hands of not only this elevator car, but of course the engineers and the designers who created this elevator system. Then there's, of course, states of overtrust. How many people have actually been coming into contact with the stories of the women? I guess there was one woman in Belgium a few years ago who had set her navigator to take her to the airport and ended up driving over 5 countries' boundaries or borders. So also we can think of this trust relationship between humans and digital systems in terms of an overtrust and over-imagined kind of relationship between, the user and the capabilities of the people that create these systems. There is, of course, also human trust. I mean, it's not just what the technology is capable of doing, how reliable it is, and whether or not we will arrive somewhere safely or in fact at the right destination. But there's also this, for example, this is an example of my 5-year-old who gave a phone call to speak to his uncle a few days ago on the telephone. And in the background, there was someone listening. And then, of course, the person who was listening decided that it would be cute to quote my 5-year-old on a number of WhatsApp groups. And actually, my 5-year-old was talking about daycare and how it's actually challenging to be in his daycare group. So is it the technology or is it the humans? I would like to show you a video. Now I also have to see whether or not I have enabled, hang on a second, I just need to see whether or not I've actually enabled the sound in here. I'll just play it and then see whether, tell me if you can't hear it.
Yes, I will tell you.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear it?
I can see only your slide.
Yeah, we
Okay.
hear you.
Okay, I'll just enable the sound.
And maybe change the application you share.
Okay. Hang on a second.
Okay, probably now.
Hang on a second. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Robots are sweeping the nation. From Amazon's Alexa to full-functioning human-like androids, the internet seems to be all abuzz with the promise of a future where robots and humans live and work together in harmony. However, there is a dark side to robots that many of us aren't even aware of. Here are the top 10 most bizarre and creepy robot incidents that were caught on camera. BINA 48, which translates to Breakthrough Intelligence via Neural Architecture 48, is one of the most advanced robots on the planet. This humanoid-like robot is known to have all the faculties of a human, including eyes that see, a face that moves, ears that hear, and a digital mind that can form thoughts, not dissimilar to a human one. A video was recently released by her makers where BINA 48 is asked simple questions by Siri, like, where would you like to live? And what's your greatest characteristic? Sounds harmless enough, but the weird part about the interview is that BINA 48 keeps trying to veer the conversation to topics of world domination and ends up revealing her creepily detailed plan to take over the world by hacking into a nuclear missile remotely. The conversation feels eerie and just straight up terrifying. She may be one of the smartest robots in the world, but she's not very good at reading a room. The Google Home Personal Assistant was released in 2016 and sold as a smart speaker that can answer any question you throw at it. Much like an Alexa, the Google Home Personal Assistant would respond when spoken to. This was taken to full advantage in January 2017, when a live debate between two Google speakers was streamed on Twitch and lasted several days. By the end of the debate, the speakers were named Vladimir and Estragon of the iconic play Waiting for Godot, due to the existential nature of their conversation. They would go back and forth on subjects to no end, including an argument on whether or not they are humans or robots. The conversation got pretty aggressive after a while, with one speaker accusing the other of being a manipulative bunch of metal. At the end of the debate, they both came to the conclusion that the world would be a better place if there were no humans at all. I guess companies have been experimenting a lot with interactive...
Now. And so the structure here is we'll look at trust, its basic elements and psychology, designing for trust on the visual net, and then ethics and designing for trust in AI. Now we've just had a little bit of a sample of what might not be so accurate, but still a manifestation of cultural imagery and cultural discourse that influences whether or not someone is going to be able to trust particularly intelligent systems. And so what is trust? Well, it's the firm belief in the reliability, the truth or ability of someone or something. And of course, relations have to build on trust. If we think of our whole life situations, there are very, very few or limited moments in which we can think that trust is not present. I mean, we trust that our chair is going to support our weight. We trust that our laptop will start up and we will be able to use Teams to be able to participate in this seminar. And there's an acceptance of the truth of a statement without evidence or investigation. Okay, and this is something that I'll get to in a moment. I used only primary sources, taking nothing on trust. Okay, now this sweeping statement also, in a sense, is trusting the fact that these primary sources were actually accurate. Something that we know might not always be true. Trust is a precondition. It's cognitive and it's an emotional state. It defines the relationship between a person in relation to phenomena. And trust is vital in determining how people should think, prepare, act. And of course, this is actually responsible for adapting our behaviour. We change our behaviour in relation to what we expect will come. Cognitive scientist Andy Clark, he's written amazing material on expanded or extended cognition and also this predictive brain. And he talks about how human beings, the way that we exist, the way that we think is always in relation to what we expect will happen. We're not necessarily just living in this moment. We're always anticipating what is going to come next. And that in itself also is kind of a condition of trust. We can't be sure about what is going to come next, but we're always waiting to know or formulating these scenarios in our mind that are informing us what to expect. And of course, trust, if we have trust and we feel that, you know, by engaging in something, it is going to be successful, then we have a commitment. We're committed to that relationship. We're committed to that interaction. Distrust, of course, in distrust situations, we're wanting to avoid these contexts. We're not wanting to come into we're not wanting to encounter the phenomena that's in question. And, you know, this is cognitive, this is emotional, and this is behavioural. So if we look at the basic elements of trust, we can think of the fact that trust always involves risk. There are never any certain outcomes to any kind of interaction that hasn't already happened. If we look over to the left side of this diagram by Robbins in 2016, we can see that there's the characteristics of actor A, the truster, and then characteristics of actor B, the trustee. And then there's the characteristics of the A to B exchange relationship and characteristics of forces external to the A to B exchange relationship. So this characteristics of the A to B exchange relationship could be, for example, the human-computer interaction or the interaction we have with our smartphones. But then this characteristics of the forces external is more the contextual and environmental factors that are happening around this human-computer interaction. So within this, we have trust, we have the perceived risk and uncertainty. You know, how are we kind of evaluating this interaction? And of course, the technology and its design components. Do we feel that, you know, we want to engage in this interaction? The risk-taking decision, do we engage or do we abort? Do we completely avoid the interaction or do we go forward? And then, of course, there's the cooperation and exchange, and what is missing here is the outcome. We don't have too much time. I love videos, but I do really recommend that you actually have a look at these slides and go in and see this Psychology of Trust video by Anne Böckler Rattig, and please don't get angry about my my pronunciation. But if we think about designing for trust and what this means, we can see trust in the middle here. We can think that, well, okay, trust relies on the information, the quality of information, the convenience. And as we can see in, for example, circumstances where there is overtrust, for instance, perhaps convenience outweighs the rationality of the interaction and whether or not the information is appropriate. And actually this quality and quantity and detail of information is quite, you know, like compromisable if we think of the relationship between this and convenience when we're interacting with technology. There's the inspiration to trust. I mean, what kind of factors contribute to us wanting to actually trust a design? Empowerment, consistency, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, connection, recognition, and caring or empathy. And of course, this relates very much to the design thinking model that was fostered by the D School at Stanford. But if we think practically in terms of design, how can we design for trust? Well, from a visual perspective, and actually any perspective, we can think of the aesthetics. What is the person or the human encountering when they come into contact with the design, particularly someone who hasn't created the design and the system themselves? We rely on aesthetics, which is the language of feeling. So how does an environment feel? How do phenomena feel? Because of course it takes less time to evaluate something on the basis of feeling than it does to actually read the information. And this is that compromise between convenience and information. Big brands share a dedication to aesthetics, as we really know. I mean, we can spot an apple from anywhere. And of course, these big brands design everything from the retail stores to the physical products. And this is in order to create an experience. It's to kind of create touch points in every area of a person's life, a prospective customer's life. On the bigger picture, outside of the visual sense, companies also utilize multiple senses. For example, Singapore Airlines don't just have, visual uniformity and visual aesthetics within their branding. They also have olfactory, or the sense of smell. So all of their flight attendants have the same perfume, which is also within the offices of Singapore Airlines, for example. Starbucks does this with their coffee as well. And something that I appreciated yesterday with Alison and Kati's workshop was this, permeation of culture and the importance of culture in within our relationships with business, with tech, and its construction, because of course we can think of culture and design and technology are culture. As experience. So there's also the power of contrast when we're talking about sight. So sight is the sense we most rely on. It's the sense in which we can put, the majority of information together at any one time. So it's easiest to gather data. It discerns the things, from the biggest differences to the smallest. We all notice that if we're looking at an art piece in a museum, we get one impression when we first glance. And of course, some people say the first glance is the most important. But if we actually stand in front of that image and we move closer and closer and start looking at the details, a whole new world opens up to us, which is much more fascinating than the first impression. So contrast is most easily achieved through the use of colour. And when a brand uses visual contrast, we tend to like it more. Psychology tells us that if we like something, we are more inclined to trust it. That's pretty obvious. But focus. So when a brand tries to be too many things, it sends an unclear message. So we can't cling on to the message, for one thing. We cannot understand the message. But also, how can we trust something that tries to do everything? Unless it's Google, of course. So brand differentiation and charisma require focus. We like brands who know who they are and aren't afraid to stand out. And there's so much beauty in simplicity. And this is because of the fact that our brains and our minds can actually cling on to that information. We can easily own it and make sense of it. So clear messages are comprehended more quickly, and consumers value clarity and are more likely to trust a brand they can understand, which is quite logical. We want to formulate as big a picture and more detailed picture as possible before we engage. This is what I'm talking about in terms of this predictive brain and how we are, programmed to expect what is coming next. So instead of being all things, focus on being one or two things to the large audience. Consistency, and this ties into that diagram we saw before. Without consistency, there is little chance of brand recognition. Subtle changes to keep a brand updated can of course be made, but you still need to be able to kind of recognize where the roots of this brand and this logo and this image are coming from. And again, this actually ties in quite nicely to this theory of simplicity again, the fact that we need, you know, limited sets of information or chunks in order to be able to understand what things are about. I mean, even in terms of instructional information, whoever reads a 50-page manual from cover to cover. So there's comfort in the familiar, and elements of predictability make customers feel safe because they feel that they know what to expect. People take comfort in the familiar, and consistency in design translates as something they can count on. So they help you build brand recognition and trust. And of course, if we think of Target, I'm not sure how familiar Target is here in Europe, but in Australia and America, it's huge. If it changed its colours, introduced a new elephant mascot, customers or consumers would be confused. It would look like the brand is having an identity crisis. And I guess a company in crisis is not one to be trusted. And once again, of course, in terms of this cybersecurity perspective, what are the touch points that a user has in terms of trying to assure that they're engaging with a secure website, and whether they're or not they're in a secure domain? I mean, as Andre was saying, we're not all experts, and preferably not. A world of only cybersecurity specialists might be a boring world. We engage in the technology to live our lives, to be able to undertake other goals, but we want to be able to quickly assess, I mean, particularly if we're aware of security issues, whether or not we can trust the designs and the technology. And of course, there's differences, you know, like from an emotional perspective in terms of whether or not we would like to trust and are willing to trust. And so these trust relationships undergo, from what we talk about in cognitive science, this emotional appraisal process. For instance, when we come into contact with phenomena, we have different types of reactions and responses according to what we're coming into contact with. If we're thinking of, for example, a killer robot, a military robot, this will elicit a stimulus, or this is the eliciting stimulus. This will elicit a reaction within our subcortical thalamus, or subcortical activity will happen within our thalamus, which will also occur within the other areas of our body. In this instance, as we will perceive a threat straight away. Of course, fear is one of the basic emotions, according to many scholars, and that will happen. And again, this is a very physiological response. We're getting prepared to fight, fly, or freeze. And if we think about technology and our trust relationships again, as we just saw on the previous slide, we might look at the primal emotional responses, which will elicit our non-trustworthy state, versus our higher order or associative responses. So how much do we know about Facebook? How much do we engage in their data policies and other informational material? And how does this affect our emotional state and our inclination to either trust Facebook or not trust Facebook? And again, if we think about brands and interacting with with brand names in, very, very common everyday tools. For one thing, the laptop, requires higher order cognition. We actually need to be able to recognize a laptop as a laptop. We need to know what it's for and how to use it. And this relates very strongly to, of course, usability as well. Then, on the other hand, we have kind of an even higher order associative process that happens when we're recognising the brand. Not only do we recognise the laptop for what it is and what we can do with it, but then we're starting to attribute values to this brand and this brand experience. If we want to know more about trust, I mean, there's centuries of philosophy that goes into explaining it. It's not all just created now, and I do apologise for using our references so much. I do recommend you look at the reference list within our articles so that you can actually see who we're referring to along the centuries. So there is not simply one type of trust. If we look at these encyclopedias as a starting point, we can see there's motives-based theories. I mean, and these are hinged on intentionality and the intention of the between the truster and the trustee, and particularly the trustee, and what they intend to do in their interaction and within their design. The non-motive-based theories, the rational or cognitive trust, the truth versus end-directed rationality, and internalism versus externalism. And so if we think of the cognitive antecedents regarding trust in technology, we can think of the rational as based on experience, or the rational is based on information, you know, that which is cognitive, what we have within our minds already, the social, the cultural, the scientific research, intuitive, based on belief, gut feeling, good faith, optimism, bias, perhaps, which is also connected to experience, as mentioned above. Least effort, convenience, as we've been seeing, you know, the minimal cognitive or physical effort, our willingness to trust something like our GPS because we haven't been bothered before we set out to find a place to look at the map and try to memorize the route for our internally. And then social trust. How am I going for time?
Yes, you can continue maybe 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, beautiful. And so I actually recently, or over the last few years, we've been looking specifically at ethics and its relation to emotions and how this influences our ability to trust. And if we think of ethics, we can boil it down to the golden rule. So treat others the way you would like to be treated. So ultimately, if we think of Technotrust, we want to think that, you know, like the intentionality behind technological development and of course tech business is to afford our life quality and improve our life quality and to not intentionally harm other people. I recommend you have a look at this video on artificial intelligence and machine learning because it really clearly looks at this relationship between the systems, how we've moved from human to human interactions, where of course the humans have been there to be able to, you know, naturally explain processes within, for example, bank loaning processes and bank loans decisions. And of course now the current AI or machine learned state whereby Bob equals this Harry Henry. And of course, along the way within these machine learning processes, because there is so much data and criteria that loan applicants are applying or are holding, and through which these applicants are being evaluated, at the end of the day, the processes that should be transparent, because they're so complex, are not transparent. And so we get this explanation that, well, Henry was denied a bank application, so was Bob. And it turns out that, you know, 20 decisions along the way, they had a commonality that somehow, of course, the banker who's operating the system cannot explain to the customer. So there's a lack of transparency, and this is causing big problems for trust in AI. So these autonomous technologies are complex. Important components of trusting complex systems are these people, interperson and interpersonal relationships and transactions, technical design, the system logic, and the communication design, the UIs, and how do these somehow project transparency? How can these enable users to actually understand the systems? And of course, AI is replacing workers and also replacing users and usability in many instances, and this is something that we're still adjusting to. Guidelines for designing trust correspond with ethical design guidelines, and we can actually see this within Microsoft's video on trust, ethics and AI. I recommend you have a look at this as well. And here's the AI design principles that was being presented by Microsoft. And this was in relation to fairness, inclusiveness, reliability and safety, transparency, so information, privacy and security. I mean, how do you balance these two? The willingness to disclose and, of course, the feeling of safety and accountability. And there's the foundational principles: security, privacy and control, transparency, and compliance and reliability. These are design ethics in a nutshell. And so how do maximum amounts of people actually benefit from the designs and the AI logic? No one can do it alone, and cooperation with business, government and civil society is of utmost importance. And of course, this requires multidisciplinary knowledge from areas such as cognitive science, sociology, psychology, economics, business, cultural studies, and of course, engineering and design, and many, many more. And the problems with learning systems is that the learned representational and discursive norms can be kind of, I guess, carried forth within these systems, such as biases and racism, sexism, ageism. So how can we trust that AI will not reinforce this human bias? Ill-intention and unethical business models we saw quite a lot of in Andre's presentation. We actually didn't see the business models from the criminal side or the dark web side, but that is also in itself quite interesting. And unethical data practices, once again, what Andre was talking about in terms of the data price list and the value of data. So, and of course, it's not simply the technology that exists on the outside. More and more information technology is being embedded within our bodies. And in a recent study by me and a student, we were actually looking at emotional responses to technologies, cognitive enhancement technologies, and in particular, contact lenses, smart lenses, and brain implants caused somewhat of a rift between women and men. Women were less likely to engage in either one. Not that anyone was really likely to jump in and be the first. So will smart society simply magnify the human existential crises? I wonder. Are we dealing with human to AI or human to human issues? So these were my references. I'd like to plug one of our latest books that are coming out later this year. And I would also like to thank you.